I stood in my mentor's apartment wearing an FBI wire, watching her open a hidden safe behind a bookcase. Inside sat a Caravaggio the world thought was lost forever. Catherine smiled. She said my own diligence was the exact reason she had to destroy my career. She slapped a folder onto the table, documenting dozens of fakes in major museums. This isn't just my operation, she said. Every curator who authenticated these is guilty too. Before we continue and find out how it all began, please subscribe and leave a like. We'd truly love to read your comments below. They called me into the boardroom at 4:30 on a Friday. I knew what that meant. In 15 years at the Whitmore Museum, I had watched enough colleagues receive their death sentences at that hour to recognize the ritual. Marcus Whitmore sat at the head of the table with his hands folded like a man at prayer. The rest of the board flanked him in their tailored suits and careful expressions. "Dr. Hayes," Marcus said, and I hated how my name sounded in his mouth. It sounded clinical and distant, like I was already a stranger. "We need to discuss the Bellini acquisition." I felt something cold settle in my chest. The Bellini was a Virgin and Child painting I had authenticated 6 months ago, the one that had cost the museum $3.2 million. There have been questions raised about its provenance, Marcus continued. His voice was smooth, practiced, the voice of a man who had delivered bad news before and would do so again. Questions that require immediate attention. I looked at the faces around the table. No one would meet my eyes except for Ellen Hartley, the head of acquisitions, and even her gaze was sharp and assessing. What kind of questions? I kept my voice level, but my hands were cold. Ellen slid a folder across the polished mahogany toward me. I opened it slowly. Inside were emails. They were my emails, showing correspondence between myself and a dealer in Milan named Paolo Russo. The emails discussed the Bellini, yes, but also other paintings with prices and commissions. Numbers that made my stomach turn. "I never sent these," I said. The words came out flat, factual. I was still trying to process what I was seeing. My email signature, my words, but I had never written them. "Dr. Hayes," Ellen said, and her tone was almost sympathetic. Almost. "We have traced these emails to your account. The IP addresses match your home network and the museum Wi-Fi." I felt the room tilt slightly. Someone had been in my accounts. Someone who knew exactly what they were doing. Someone who understood how to make it look authentic. "This is a setup," I said. But even as I spoke, I could see it in their faces. They had already decided. The verdict had been reached before I walked through that door. Marcus cleared his throat. "The Bellini has been examined by 3 independent experts at our request," he said. "All 3 have concluded that it is a very sophisticated fake. A 19th century copy, possibly Italian workshop, but definitely not Renaissance. Definitely not Bellini." The room was silent except for the hum of the air conditioning and the distant sound of traffic 15 floors below. "We need to act quickly to contain the situation," Ellen said. She was not looking at me anymore. She was looking at Marcus, awaiting direction like a good soldier. "The board has voted to terminate your employment effective immediately. We will be issuing a statement that you acted alone, without the museum's knowledge or approval." I heard myself laugh. It was a strange, hollow sound. "You're making me the scapegoat." Marcus had the decency to look uncomfortable. "We're protecting the institution, Dr. Hayes. The Whitmore has a reputation to maintain. If it becomes known that our authentication processes were compromised, we lose everything. We lose donors, loans, and credibility. So you destroy mine instead, I said. I was surprised by how calm I sounded. Inside, I felt like I was falling, but my voice remained steady. This is not personal, Marcus said, and I wanted to laugh again. Everything about this was personal. I had given 15 years to this museum. I had built exhibitions that traveled the world. I had written catalogs that were used in university courses. You have 1 hour to clear your office, Ellen said. She stood, smoothing her skirt. Security will escort you out. You are not to contact any staff members or remove any museum property beyond your personal belongings. I watched them file out of the room one by one. Soon I was alone with the folder of fabricated emails and the knowledge that my career had just ended. I walked back to my office in a daze. My assistant, Trevor, was gone for the day. The door to my corner office stood open, and I could see the city skyline through the floor-to-ceiling windows. Manhattan stretched out before me, indifferent and vast. I had loved this view. I had earned this view. Now it would belong to someone else. Security arrived before I had finished packing. 2 men in navy blazers arrived, their expressions apologetic. They watched as I emptied my desk drawers into a cardboard box. I packed books, files, and a framed photograph of me, standing next to Dr. Catherine Marsh at the opening of the Caravaggio exhibition 3 years ago. Catherine was my mentor, the woman who had hired me straight out of graduate school and taught me everything I knew about Renaissance art. I looked at her face in the photograph, her elegant profile, her silver hair pulled back in that perfect chignon, the slight smile that suggested she knew something the rest of us did not. Catherine had recommended me for this position. She had vouched for my expertise. She had been my champion for 15 years. I needed to call her. She would know what to do. The security guards walked me to the service elevator. We descended in silence. When we reached the loading dock, one of them handed me the box. "For what it's worth, Dr. Hayes," he said quietly. "Everyone knows you're good at what you do." I thanked him because I did not know what else to say. Then I walked out into the cold November evening and stood on the sidewalk with my box and my shattered reputation. I called Catherine from a cab. She answered on the 3rd ring. "Darling," she said, and her voice was warm and familiar. "I heard what happened. Marcus called me an hour ago. I'm devastated for you." Something in her tone made me pause. She sounded devastated, yes, but there was something else underneath, something careful. "Catherine, I need your help," I said. "Someone set me up. Those emails are fake." "Of course they're fake," she said immediately. "Anyone who knows you would know that." "But the board is in crisis mode, Sarah. They're frightened. The Bellini scandal could destroy the museum standing." The cab crawled through Friday evening traffic. Around me, the city pulsed with light and movement and people going home to their lives. "Who would do this to me?" I asked. There was a pause on the other end of the line. Just a beat too long. "I don't know, darling," Catherine said finally. "But we'll figure it out. Come to my apartment tomorrow. We'll go through everything together. We'll find a way forward." I felt something unclench slightly in my chest. Catherine would help me. She always had. "Thank you," I said. "I don't know what I would do without you." I spent that night in my apartment, drinking wine and searching through my emails. I found nothing suspicious. Whoever had done this had been meticulous. They had covered their tracks perfectly. The fake emails were gone, deleted from my sent folder, visible only in the printouts Ellen had shown me. I thought about Paolo Russo, the dealer mentioned in the emails. I had heard his name before, but I had never worked with him. At 2 in the morning, I pulled up the authentication report I had written for the Bellini. I read it again, slowly, looking for any mistake I might have made. But there was nothing. Every test had come back positive. The wood panel was period correct. The pigments matched known Bellini works. The craquelure was consistent with age. The painting had come with seemingly impeccable provenance, with documented ownership going back to a Venetian merchant family in the 1600s. Unless the provenance itself was fake. Unless someone had created a complete paper trail that would satisfy even the most rigorous investigation. That kind of operation would require expertise, connections, and money. Significant money. I poured another glass of wine and watched the city lights blur through my apartment windows. Who had that kind of reach? Who had that kind of skill? I thought about the other paintings I had authenticated in the past year. A Titian portrait, a Bronzino study, a small Tintoretto that had come through a private collector, all from impeccable sources, all with documentation that had checked out. Had any of them been fakes? Had I been used as an unwitting tool in a larger scheme? The thought made me sick. Catherine's apartment was in the East 70s, a pre-war building with a doorman who knew me by name. "Dr. Marsh is expecting you, Dr. Hayes," he said, waving me toward the elevator. I rode up to the 12th floor with a folder of documents and questions that had kept me awake all night. Catherine opened the door before I could knock. She was dressed casually in a cashmere sweater and tailored trousers, her silver hair loose around her shoulders. "Sarah," she said, pulling me into a hug. "Come in. I've made coffee." Her apartment was exactly as I remembered it. Books everywhere, museum catalogs stacked on every surface, a Venetian mirror over the fireplace, framed exhibition posters from shows she had curated over her 40-year career. I had always loved this space. It felt like a sanctuary, a place where art and scholarship existed in perfect harmony. We sat in her study, a book-lined room with windows overlooking Park Avenue. Catherine poured coffee into delicate cups and listened as I explained everything. The emails, the authentication, the board meeting. She nodded in all the right places, made sympathetic noises, asked careful questions. "The provenance seemed solid," I said. I checked everything. The Bellini came through the Rossi family, documents going back 3 centuries. "The Rossi family," Catherine repeated. She was looking at her coffee cup, not at me. "Yes, they're well-known collectors. Old money, very private." Something in her voice made me look at her more closely. "Do you know them?" I asked. "I've dealt with them before," she said. "Years ago. They have an extraordinary private collection." I set down my cup. "Catherine, what aren't you telling me?" She looked up then, and I saw something in her eyes I had never seen before. A calculation, a weighing of options. Then she smiled, and the moment passed. "Nothing, darling. I'm just thinking through what we know. The Bellini came through legitimate channels. Your authentication was thorough. Someone must have switched the painting after it entered the museum. It was a plausible theory. It made sense. But something about the way she had paused before speaking made my instincts prickle. "I need to contact Paolo Russo," I said. "The dealer mentioned in the fake emails. If I can prove I never communicated with him, it undermines the board's case." Catherine nodded slowly. "That's smart. But be careful, Sarah. If someone went to this much trouble to frame you, they won't like you asking questions." I left her apartment an hour later with more questions than answers. Catherine had promised to make some calls, reach out to contacts in the art world who might know something about sophisticated forgeries. She had been kind, supportive, exactly what I needed. But that moment of hesitation stayed with me. I replayed it in my mind as I walked down Park Avenue in the thin December sunlight. That night, I started my own investigation. I began with Paolo Russo. A few searches revealed that he was a mid-level dealer based in Milan, specializing in Italian Renaissance works. He had a decent reputation, but nothing spectacular. No red flags. I found his email and drafted a message explaining that I was investigating fraudulent emails sent in my name. I asked if he had ever communicated with me or received any correspondence from my address. His response came the next morning, brief and formal. He had no record of any communication with me. He had never heard of the Bellini painting. He was sorry for my troubles, but could not help. I stared at his email for a long time. Dead end. Whoever had created those fake emails had been careful not to involve actual people who might contradict the narrative. I spent the next 2 weeks applying for jobs at other museums and galleries. Every application required a reference from my previous employer. Every interview would require an explanation for why I had been terminated. I was toxic now. Damaged goods. The whispers had already started. I could feel them in the silence when I called former colleagues, in the carefully worded regrets from institutions that had once courted my expertise. Dr. Catherine Marsh remained my one constant. She called regularly to check on me. She gave me the names of lawyers who might help me fight the termination. She invited me to her apartment for dinner and let me rage about the injustice of it all. I was grateful for her support, even as a small, insistent voice in the back of my mind kept returning to that moment in her study. One evening, unable to sleep, I pulled up Catherine's biography on the museum website. I had read it dozens of times before, but now I studied it differently. She had been at the Whitmore for 20 years before I arrived. She had built the Renaissance collection from almost nothing. She had cultivated relationships with dealers and collectors around the world. She had an impeccable eye for quality. I clicked through to articles about major acquisitions she had overseen. A Botticelli, a Raphael drawing, 2 Caravaggios. I paused at that last one, Caravaggio. The exhibition we had done together 3 years ago had been Catherine's idea. She had secured loans from private collectors I had never heard of. The show had been a massive success, drawing crowds and critical acclaim. I remembered standing next to her at the opening, feeling proud to be her protégé. Something made me search for more information about the private collectors who had loaned works to that exhibition. I found names, addresses. I started cross-referencing them with known dealers and auction records. Most were legitimate. Established collectors with documented histories of acquisitions and sales. But 2 of the names led nowhere. No other loans, no auction records, no presence in the art world before that Caravaggio exhibition. I sat back in my chair. It could mean nothing. Private collectors often kept low profiles, but it could also mean something else. Shell companies, fabricated identities, a way to introduce paintings into the museum world with manufactured provenance. I thought about the Bellini again, the Rossi family that Catherine knew, the impeccable documentation, the painting that 3 experts now said was a 19th century fake. I began mapping connections. I created a spreadsheet with every major acquisition Catherine had overseen in the past decade: paintings, drawings, sculptures. I noted the dealers involved, the collectors who had sold them, the authentication processes used. Patterns started to emerge. Certain names appeared repeatedly, dealers I had never heard of before. Catherine brought them to my attention. I found a storage unit in Queens that rented for $40 a month. I filled it with printouts and notes because I did not trust digital files anymore. Someone had accessed my email accounts. Someone with sophisticated technical skills. I needed to keep my investigation offline in a place where no one would think to look. I worked during the day at the storage unit and returned to my apartment only to sleep. 3 weeks after my termination, I received a call from an unknown number. I almost didn't answer. "Dr. Hayes?" The voice was male, accented, Italian. "This is Paolo Russo. We corresponded by email some weeks ago." I sat up straighter. "Mr. Russo." "Yes. Thank you for calling." There was a pause. "I have been thinking about your situation. Something you should know. 6 months ago, someone approached me about authenticating a Bellini. They said they were calling on your behalf." My heart was pounding. "Who was it?" Another pause. "A woman. She did not give her name. She said you were too busy to handle it personally, but that you had recommended me. I told her I do not work that way. I do not authenticate paintings for absent clients." She became angry and hung up. I gripped the phone tighter. "Can you describe her voice?" "An older woman," Russo said. "American, educated, and confident. She spoke like someone used to getting what she wants." My mouth was dry. "What happened after that?" "Nothing," Russo said. "I forgot about it until I saw the news about the Whitmore scandal. Then I saw your name and remembered. I thought you should know someone tried to use your reputation months before any of this happened." I thanked him and ended the call. My hands were shaking. An older American woman with an educated, confident voice. Someone who had tried to involve Russo in the scheme before finding another way forward. Someone who knew my reputation could be useful. Someone who had planned this months in advance. I thought about Catherine's voice, warm and cultured, used to command. I called her. She answered immediately. "Sarah, darling, how are you holding up?" Her concern sounded genuine. It always did. "I need to ask you something," I said. "Of course, anything." I took a breath. "Have you ever worked with Paolo Russo, the dealer in Milan?" There was the briefest hesitation. Just a fraction of a second. "The name sounds familiar. Why do you ask?" "He called me today," I said, watching my reflection in the dark window of my apartment. "He said someone approached him 6 months ago, claiming to represent me. Someone who wanted him to authenticate a Bellini." Silence on the other end of the line. Then Catherine laughed. It sounded forced. "Sarah, darling, you're chasing shadows. Anyone could have used your name. It doesn't mean anything." "But you said his name sounded familiar," I pressed. "Have you worked with him or not?" Another pause. "I may have. I work with dozens of dealers, Sarah. I can't remember all of them." She had never been vague about her professional contacts before. Catherine Marsh knew everyone in the art world. She could recite provenance chains from memory. She did not forget dealers. "I need to go through your acquisition records," I said. "All of them. From the past 10 years. "Why would you need to do that?" Her voice had changed. Still warm, but there was steel underneath now. Because I think someone has been using the Whitmore to launder forgeries, I said. And I think it started long before the Bellini. The silence stretched out. I could hear traffic in the background on her end. She was outside somewhere. That's a serious accusation, Catherine said finally. I'm not accusing you, I said, but we both knew I was lying. I'm trying to find out who set me up. If there are other fakes in the collection, the board needs to know. You would want to know. She sighed. Sarah, I understand you're desperate to clear your name, but paranoia won't help you. You need to accept what happened and move forward. Someone called Paolo Russo, pretending to be my representative, I said. Someone who sounds exactly like you. The words hung in the air between us. I heard her intake of breath. I think we should meet, she said. Her voice was very calm now, very controlled. Tomorrow. My apartment. We'll talk this through properly. She ended the call before I could respond. I did not sleep that night. I sat in my apartment with the lights off, watching the city and thinking about Catherine, the woman who had mentored me, who had opened doors for me, who had been my champion and my friend. I thought about all the things I had told her over the years, my methods, my contacts, my authentication techniques, everything someone would need to create convincing forgeries. The next morning, I did not go to Catherine's apartment. Instead, I went to the New York Public Library and requested access to their archives of art auction catalogs. I spent 8 hours going through records of sales from the past decade. I cross-referenced every painting Catherine had acquired for the Whitmore with its supposed provenance. Most checked out, but 4 did not. 4 paintings with gaps in their ownership histories. 4 paintings with documentation that appeared only in the years immediately before their acquisition. One of those 4 was a Caravaggio, a small oil study purchased 5 years ago from a private Swiss collector for $7 million. The collector's name was Hans Müller. I searched for him in every database I could access. Nothing. No other sales, no other acquisitions, no presence at all. Before the Caravaggio suddenly appeared with perfect provenance dating back to the 17th century. I took the train to New Haven that afternoon. Yale's art history department had the most comprehensive database of Caravaggio works in North America. Professor Linda Chen had been my dissertation advisor 15 years ago. She agreed to see me without asking questions. Her office was exactly as I remembered it. Books piled everywhere, slides scattered across her desk, the smell of coffee and old paper. Sarah, she said, embracing me. I heard about the Whitmore. I'm so sorry. I showed her photographs of the Caravaggio the museum had acquired. Do you remember this piece? She studied the images. Yes. Catherine brought it to my attention before the acquisition, asked me to verify the attribution. Beautiful work, very typical of his late period. She looked up at me. Why? Who was the seller? I asked. She frowned, thinking. Swiss collector, I believe. Catherine handled all of that. She just needed my expertise on the brushwork and composition. I pulled out the documentation I had copied at the library. Hans Müller. Have you ever heard of him? Linda shook her head. No, but Swiss collectors are notoriously private. There's no record of him anywhere, I said. No other sales, no other paintings. Nothing before this Caravaggio suddenly appeared with provenance going back 300 years. Linda was quiet for a moment. Then she pulled out a file from her cabinet. Catherine asked me to authenticate 3 paintings for her over the past 5 years, all from private European collectors, all with similar provenance patterns. She spread the files across her desk. I saw names I recognized from my own research: Muller, Dubois, Rossi. I thought it was odd at the time, Linda said. These extraordinary works suddenly appearing from collectors no one had ever heard of. But Catherine was so confident. She had documentation, letters, photographs of the paintings in situ in private collections. Everything looked legitimate. Did you ever meet any of these collectors? I asked. No, Linda said. Catherine said they were very private, didn't want publicity. She handled all the negotiations herself. I felt cold. Linda, I think they're all fake. The collectors, the provenance, maybe even some of the paintings. She looked at me over her reading glasses. That would mean Catherine has been running a forgery operation for years, using the Whitmore to legitimize fake paintings. Sarah, do you understand what you're suggesting? I nodded. She set me up. She needed a scapegoat, someone whose reputation would take the fall while she continued the operation. Linda sat back in her chair. You need proof. Real proof. Because if you're right, this will destroy more than just Catherine's career. It will shake the entire art world. I thought about that. Museums around the world trusted the Whitmore's authentication. If our collection included sophisticated forgeries, every institution that had borrowed from us or purchased works we had verified would need to conduct their own investigations. The scandal would be enormous. I need to see those paintings again, I said. The ones Catherine acquired from the phantom collectors. Linda shook her head. You can't. You're banned from the museum. Security would stop you at the door. She was right. I had been officially terminated. I had no access, no credentials. Marcus Whitmore had made sure I could not get near the collection, but I knew someone who could. Trevor, my former assistant, still worked at the museum. He was young, ambitious, and he had liked me. More importantly, he had access to the storage facilities where paintings were kept when not on display. I had trained him. He knew how to document condition reports. He could photograph the paintings without raising suspicion. I called Trevor that evening. He answered on the first ring. Dr. Hayes? His voice was cautious. I wasn't sure you'd want to hear from me. I got straight to the point. I need your help. I need photographs of 4 specific paintings in the collection. High-resolution images showing the entire surface. Can you do that? There was a long pause. They told us not to communicate with you. They said you might try to tamper with evidence. Evidence. They were already building a criminal case against me. Trevor, I was set up. Someone has been using the museum to launder forgeries. I need to prove it before they destroy my entire career. If they catch me helping you, I'll lose my job, he said, but he didn't say no. I know, I said. I wouldn't ask if it wasn't important. But if I'm right, the museum is sitting on millions of dollars in forgeries. Someone needs to know. Another pause. Then he sighed. Send me the list. I'll do it after hours when the storage facility is empty. I sent him the names of the 4 paintings with phantom provenance: the Caravaggio, a Titian portrait, a Bronzino study, the Tintoretto. Trevor worked fast. Within 3 days, I had high-resolution images of all 4 paintings in my email. I downloaded them immediately and deleted the messages. Then I spent a week studying every inch of those images. The brushwork was extraordinary. Whoever had painted these understood Renaissance techniques at a master level. The aging was convincing, the craquelure patterns looked natural, but there were inconsistencies, tiny details that bothered me. The Caravaggio had too much lapis lazuli in the blue pigments. Lapis was expensive in the 17th century. Caravaggio, working in poverty during his exile, would have used it sparingly. The Titian portrait had modern canvas weave underneath the paint layer. I could see it in the extreme close-up images Trevor had captured. Someone had aged the canvas artificially, but the weave pattern was wrong, too uniform, too industrial. Renaissance canvases were hand-loomed with irregular patterns. I documented everything, every anomaly, every technical detail that suggested modern fabrication. But I needed more than my own analysis. I needed someone with credentials who could examine the paintings physically and testify to their fraudulent nature. Someone the art world would believe. I thought about who might help me. Most of my colleagues at other museums had stopped returning my calls, but there was one person who might listen. Dr. James Morrison taught conservation science at NYU. We had worked together on a symposium about pigment analysis 3 years ago. He specialized in technical examination of Renaissance works. More importantly, he had no connection to Catherine Marsh. I called him and explained everything. "If you're right," he said, "this is the biggest art fraud of the century. But I can't examine paintings in the Whitmore collection without official authorization." "What if the paintings came to you?" I asked. "What if someone arranged for them to be loaned to NYU for a technical study?" He was quiet for a moment. "That would require approval from the museum director, from Marcus Whitmore himself." I thought about Marcus. He had thrown me to the wolves to protect the museum's reputation. But he was not stupid. If I could convince him that there were more forgeries in the collection, he would have to act. I drafted an email to Marcus. I laid out everything I had found: the phantom collectors, the impossible provenance, the technical inconsistencies in the paintings. I explained that Dr. Morrison at NYU was willing to conduct a comprehensive examination if the museum would authorize it. I did not accuse Catherine directly. I framed it as a question of institutional integrity. The Whitmore needed to verify its collection before the scandal grew larger. I sent the email at midnight. Then I waited. Marcus Whitmore was not the type of man to ignore a credible threat to his institution. By 8 the next morning, my phone rang. Unknown number. I answered. "Dr. Hayes, this is Marcus Whitmore. We need to talk." His voice was tight, controlled. "Can you come to my office this afternoon?" 2:00. I arrived at the Whitmore 15 minutes early. Security stopped me at the entrance. "Dr. Hayes is not authorized to enter the building," the guard said, reading from his computer screen. I showed him the email Marcus had sent confirming our meeting. He made a phone call. After 5 minutes, he handed me a visitor badge. "You'll be escorted at all times." Marcus's office was on the top floor with views of Central Park. He stood when I entered, but he did not offer his hand. Ellen Hartley was there too, sitting in one of the leather chairs by the window. Her expression was carefully neutral. "Dr. Hayes," Marcus said, "your email raises serious concerns. Walk me through your evidence." I laid out everything on his desk: the phantom collectors, the provenance gaps, the technical analysis of the paintings, Trevor's photographs showing the anomalies in the brushwork and materials. Marcus listened without interrupting. Ellen took notes. When I finished, Marcus leaned back in his chair. You're suggesting that Dr. Marsh has been orchestrating a forgery ring for years. I'm suggesting that someone has, I said, and that someone used my credentials to authenticate at least one forgery while setting me up to take the fall. Marcus looked at Ellen. Something passed between them, a decision being made in silence. If what you're saying is true, Ellen said, we're looking at institutional failure on a massive scale. Every acquisition Catherine oversaw would need to be re-examined. Not every acquisition, I said. Just the ones from collectors who don't exist. The ones with documentation that appeared out of nowhere. Marcus stood and walked to the window. He was quiet for a long moment, watching the park below. Dr. Morrison at NYU. You trust his expertise? He asked without turning around. Completely, I said. He's one of the best conservation scientists in the country. If those paintings are forgeries, he'll be able to prove it definitively. Marcus nodded slowly. I'll authorize the examination. But Dr. Hayes, if you're wrong about this, if you're wasting the museum's time and resources because you're angry about your termination, I will ensure you never work in this field again. I'm not wrong, I said. He turned to face me. We'll see. Ellen will coordinate with Dr. Morrison. The paintings will be delivered to NYU tomorrow under the pretext of a routine conservation survey. No one else needs to know the real purpose. He paused. That includes Dr. Marsh. We say nothing to her until we have results. I left the museum with my visitor badge and a fragile sense of hope. Marcus was taking me seriously. He was authorizing the examination, but Catherine would find out eventually. She had connections throughout the museum. Someone would mention the paintings being sent to NYU. She would know I was behind it. I needed to be ready for her response. That night, I went to the storage unit in Queens. I had copies of everything there, documents, photographs, analysis. I added my notes from the meeting with Marcus. Then, I made a backup on a thumb drive and mailed it to Professor Chen at Yale, with instructions to open it only if something happened to me. Paranoid, perhaps, but Paolo Russo's phone call had made one thing clear. Someone had been planning this for months. Dr. Morrison called me 3 days later. Sarah, you need to see this. His voice was urgent. I took the subway to NYU and met him in the conservation lab. The 4 paintings were laid out on examination tables under intense lighting. Morrison had equipment everywhere: spectrometers, microscopes, UV lamps. The Caravaggio is fake, he said without preamble. Definitely 19th century. The pigments are wrong. The medium is wrong. It's a good copy, but it's not period. He moved to the next table. The Titian is also fake. Modern canvas treated to look old, probably painted within the last 20 years. My hands were shaking. What about the other 2? Morrison shook his head. Still testing, but I'm seeing similar patterns. Someone created these paintings specifically to fool modern authentication methods. They used period-appropriate techniques where they could, but there are tells. Synthetic binders in the paint layers. Pigments that weren't available until the Industrial Revolution. Can you document everything? I asked. Every test, every finding, something that will stand up in court. He nodded. I'm writing a full technical report. It will take a week, but it will be comprehensive. Sarah, whoever made these paintings knew exactly what they were doing. This is expert-level forgery. I called Marcus from outside the lab. He answered immediately. Dr. Morrison has confirmed it, I said. At least 2 of the paintings are definite forgeries, possibly all 4. Silence on the other end. Then Marcus exhaled. Come to my office tomorrow morning, 8 o'clock. And Dr. Hayes, do not discuss this with anyone, not even Dr. Marsh. But Catherine already knew. She called me that evening. Sarah, darling, I heard you've been making inquiries about some of my acquisitions. Her voice was pleasant, conversational, as if we were discussing the weather. Someone mentioned you met with Marcus. I thought we agreed you would let me help you clear your name. I found proof, Catherine, I said. The paintings are fake. Morrison is documenting everything. Another pause, longer this time. When she spoke again, her voice had changed. The warmth was gone. You have no idea what you've done. No idea what you're interfering with. The words sent ice through my veins. I'm not interfering with anything. I'm exposing fraud. Those paintings are worth $40 million to the museum's collection, Catherine said. $40 million in assets that secure loans, attract donors, guarantee exhibition partnerships. If you expose them as forgeries, you don't just destroy my reputation. You destroy the institution. You destroy everyone who works there. I had not thought about it that way. The museum's entire financial structure was built on the value of its collection. That's not my problem, I said. You used me. You destroyed my career to protect your scheme. Catherine laughed. It was a cold sound. Your career was never that impressive, Sarah. You were a competent curator. Nothing special. I made you. I gave you opportunities you never would have had without my support. And this is how you repay me? By refusing to be your scapegoat? I felt anger rising in my chest, hot and bright. By refusing to let you ruin my life while you continue selling forgeries? She was quiet for a moment. Then she said very softly, Be careful, Sarah. You're playing a game you don't understand. There are people involved in this who won't appreciate your interference. The call ended. I stood in my apartment, holding the phone, trying to process what she had just said. There are people involved, not just Catherine, a network. I thought about the forgeries, the level of skill required, the provenance documentation, the ability to access museum systems and plant false emails. This was bigger than one person. I did not sleep that night. I sat by my window and watched the street below. Every car that slowed made my heart race. Every shadow seemed threatening. Catherine had essentially admitted to the forgery scheme. She had threatened me, and she had implied that others were involved. People who might take more direct action to protect their operation. At 7 the next morning, I took a cab to the Whitmore. I arrived early and waited in the lobby until Marcus's assistant came to escort me upstairs. Marcus was already in his office with Ellen and 2 other people I did not recognize. A man in a dark suit introduced himself as Special Agent Robert Chen from the FBI's art crime team. The woman with him was Assistant U.S. Attorney Lisa Park. Dr. Hayes, Agent Chen said, Mr. Whitmore has briefed us on your findings. We'd like to hear your account directly. I spent 2 hours walking them through everything. The phantom collectors, the technical analysis, Catherine's phone call the night before. Agent Chen took notes. Park asked precise questions about dates, amounts, provenance documents. Dr. Marsh essentially confessed during your phone call last night, Park said. That gives us probable cause for a warrant. We'll need to move quickly before she has time to destroy evidence. She looked at Marcus. We'll need access to all of Dr. Marsh's files, her office, her computer, her correspondence. Marcus nodded. Whatever you need. Agent Chen turned to me. Dr. Hayes, you need to understand that you're now a witness in a federal investigation. That means Dr. Marsh and anyone working with her may view you as a threat. We can offer protection if you feel you're in danger. I thought about Catherine's words. There are people involved. I'll be careful, I said. The FBI executed search warrants on Catherine's apartment and her office at the museum that afternoon. I was not there, but Trevor called me with updates. They're taking everything, he said. Computers, files, even her personal correspondence. Dr. Marsh showed up during the search. She didn't say anything. Just watched them work with this expression like she was bored. That night, Catherine called me again. I hope you're satisfied, she said. Her voice was ice. The FBI just spent 6 hours dismantling my life's work. 40 years in this field. 40 years of building collections and supporting museums. Gone because you couldn't accept responsibility for your own mistakes. I almost laughed. My mistakes? You framed me, Catherine. The admission hit me like a physical blow. She had destroyed my career not because I was useful to her scheme, but because I was becoming a liability. What do you mean, too curious? I asked. You were starting to ask questions about provenance, Catherine said, about gaps in ownership records, about collectors I had introduced to the museum. I could see you putting pieces together. So I had someone plant those emails in your account and use the Bellini scandal as the perfect cover, simpler to destroy your credibility than to risk you exposing the operation. The admission hit me like a physical blow. She had destroyed my career not because I was useful to her scheme, but because I was becoming a liability. What do you mean? Too curious? I asked. You were starting to ask questions about provenance, Catherine said. About gaps in ownership records. About collectors I had introduced to the museum. I could see you putting pieces together. So I had someone plant those emails in your account and arranged for the Bellini scandal, simpler to destroy your credibility than to risk you exposing the operation. How long has this been going on? I asked. She laughed. 20 years, maybe longer. I didn't start it. I inherited the network when I came to the Whitmore. But I perfected it. I brought in artists who could create paintings that would pass any technical examination. I cultivated relationships with collectors who didn't ask questions. I built a system that was flawless. Until now, I said. Until now, she agreed. But Sarah, you should understand something. I'm not the only one involved. There are dealers, collectors, museum directors at other institutions, people with far more power than you can imagine, people who have invested millions in this operation. And they're not going to let you destroy it. The call ended. I sat in the darkness of my apartment, trying to process what she had told me. 20 years, other museums, a network that extended far beyond the Whitmore. The FBI had found evidence in Catherine's files, but if what she said was true, shutting down her part of the operation would not stop the larger scheme. I called Agent Chen and told him everything Catherine had said. He listened quietly. We suspected the operation was larger than just Dr. Marsh, he said. But if she's willing to name other participants, we might be able to negotiate a cooperation agreement. Did she mention any specific names? I thought back through the conversation. No. She was careful, but she implied there are museum directors involved, other institutions. We'll need to move carefully, Chen said. If word gets out that we're investigating multiple museums, it could cause a panic in the art market. But Dr. Hayes, you need to take her warning seriously. If there are powerful people protecting this operation, they may view you as a threat. I'm going to assign a protective detail to monitor your apartment. 2 days later, someone broke into my storage unit in Queens. They took everything. All my research, all my documentation, the backup files I had kept offline. The only reason I knew about it was because the storage facility called to report the damaged lock. When I arrived, the unit was empty. Professional work. No signs of forced entry beyond the broken lock. They had known exactly where to look. Agent Chen was not surprised. They're cleaning up, he said. Getting rid of evidence before we can build a broader case. But Dr. Hayes, you kept copies, didn't you? I had. The thumb drive I had mailed to Professor Chen at Yale. It's safe, I said. But Chen, if they knew about the storage unit, they might know about other places I've kept information. That evening, I received an email from an unknown address. No subject line, just a message. Stop talking to the FBI. Drop the investigation. If you don't, we will make sure you face criminal charges for the Bellini forgery. We have evidence that will convince any jury you were the mastermind behind the operation. Your choice, silence or prison. The email was unsigned. I forwarded it to Agent Chen immediately. His response came within minutes. Don't respond. We're tracing the source. And, Dr. Hayes, we need to talk about witness protection. These people are serious. I thought about what that would mean. Leaving New York, changing my identity, abandoning everything I had built. All because I had refused to be Catherine's scapegoat. I met with Agent Chen the next morning at a federal building in Lower Manhattan. He had a folder full of options for witness protection. New identities, relocation cities, support services. I looked at the documents spread across the conference table and felt something harden inside me. No, I said. I'm not running. I'm not letting them win. Chen leaned back in his chair. Dr. Hayes, these people have already demonstrated they're willing to threaten you, destroy evidence, and potentially frame you for federal crimes. Witness protection is your best option for staying safe while we build the case. I shook my head. If I disappear, they control the narrative. Catherine will say I fled because I was guilty. She'll use my absence to discredit everything I've found. We have Dr. Morrison's technical report, Chen said. We have the evidence from Catherine's office. We don't need you to testify if you're concerned about safety. But that was not the point. I had spent weeks uncovering this scheme. I had lost my career, my reputation, everything I had built. I was not going to hand the resolution to someone else and vanish. There's something else, I said. Catherine told me she didn't start the operation. She inherited it. That means there are records somewhere. Documentation of how this network was built, who the other participants are, where the forgeries came from. Chen was quiet for a moment. We're working on that. But Dr. Marsh isn't cooperating. She's hired an expensive lawyer and she's not talking. I thought about what would make Catherine talk, what leverage I could find that the FBI couldn't. She has a private collection, I said, at her apartment. I've been there dozens of times. She has paintings that aren't part of any museum. Works she claimed were personal acquisitions. Chen nodded. We photographed everything during the search warrant. Most of it appears legitimate. But you didn't test anything, I said. You photographed it, but you didn't conduct technical analysis. What if some of those private paintings are part of the forgery network? What if she kept evidence in plain sight because she never thought anyone would look? Chen's expression changed. You think she might have original documentation mixed in with her personal collection? Or something more valuable, I said. I was thinking out loud now, following a thread of logic. Catherine said the operation has been running for 20 years. She said she perfected it. That means she made it more sophisticated than it was when she inherited it. What if she kept proof of her success? What if there's something in her collection that proves how good her forgers really are? Chen picked up his phone and called AUSA Park. 5 minutes later, we had a conference call with the entire investigative team. We need another warrant, Chen said, for technical examination of Dr. Marsh's private collection. If there are forgeries mixed in with legitimate works, or if there's documentation we missed, we need to find it. Park was skeptical. What's your probable cause? We already searched the apartment. We can't go back without a specific reason to believe we'll find evidence of additional crimes. I leaned toward the speakerphone. During my career, Catherine introduced me to some of her private collectors, people who loaned works to exhibitions. I can name 3 collectors who appeared in her personal correspondence but have no other presence in the art world. If we can prove those collectors are fictitious, it establishes a pattern. Give me the names, Park said. I rattled them off from memory. Hans Muller, Anton Dubois, the Rossi family. I'll have our team run background checks. If those identities are fabricated, we can argue that Dr. Marsh's entire private collection needs to be examined for evidence of fraud. She paused. But Dr. Hayes, this is going to take time. We're talking about weeks of investigation. I did not have weeks. Whoever had broken into my storage unit knew where I lived. They had my research. They had proof that I had been investigating the forgery network. Every day I waited was another day they could use to build a case against me. There's a faster way, I said. Let me talk to Catherine directly. Chen shook his head immediately. Absolutely not. You're a witness. Any contact with the subject could compromise the investigation. But I was already thinking it through. She's willing to talk to me. She called me twice after the FBI searched her apartment. She's angry, but she's also confident. She thinks I can't touch her. If I can get her to talk about her private collection, where the really valuable pieces are, you'll have your probable cause. You want to wear a wire, Park said. It was not a question. I want to finish this, I said. Catherine destroyed my career because I was getting close to the truth. I want her to know that I found it anyway. And I want it on record. Chen looked at Park through the conference call speaker. Some kind of silent negotiation was happening. Finally, Park sighed. If Dr. Hayes is willing to make contact, we can provide technical support. But Dr. Hayes, you understand the risk? If Dr. Marsh suspects you're recording, or if she contacts her associates, you could be in real danger. I understand, I said. But I was not afraid anymore. I was angry. Catherine had taken everything from me because I had been too curious, too competent, too close to discovering her scheme. She had used my reputation to legitimize forgeries and then discarded me like I was nothing. I wanted her to face what she had done. The FBI fitted me with a wire 2 days later. A tiny microphone disguised as a button on my coat. Agent Chen gave me instructions. Keep her talking. Get her to explain the operation. If she mentions other participants or specific forgeries, that's gold. But don't push too hard. If she gets suspicious, end the conversation and leave. I nodded. My hands were steady. I called Catherine that evening. We need to talk, I said. Face to face. She laughed. Why would I want to see you, Sarah? You've done enough damage. I took a breath. Because I found something you're going to want back. Something the FBI missed during their search. There was a long pause. What are you talking about? I'm talking about the Caravaggio, I said. Not the fake Caravaggio the museum had acquired. The other one. The one I had been thinking about since Professor Chen mentioned Catherine's connections to private collectors. I don't know what you mean, Catherine said, but her voice had changed. Careful now. Guarded. Yes, you do, I said. I've been going through old exhibition records. The Caravaggio show we did 3 years ago. You borrowed paintings from collectors no one had ever heard of. But one of those paintings wasn't alone. It was a plant. A real Caravaggio that should never have left the private collection it came from. You used the exhibition to authenticate it, and then you returned a copy. The silence on the other end of the line lasted so long, I thought she had hung up. Then she said very softly, "Where did you hear that?" I had not heard it anywhere. I was guessing, following a thread of logic based on how sophisticated her operation was, but her reaction told me I had guessed right. I have documentation, I lied. Photographs from before and after the exhibition. Technical analysis showing the painting that was returned to the collector was different from the one that was loaned. And I have the name of the collector, the real one. Another pause. Then Catherine said, "Come to my apartment. Tomorrow. 10 in the morning. Come alone." I met with Chen and Park that night to review the recording. Catherine's reaction to my Caravaggio theory had been telling. She didn't deny it, Park said. She asked where you heard it and demanded you come to her apartment. That's consciousness of guilt. Chen was less optimistic. It's also a trap. She's going to try to figure out what you actually know and how much of a threat you pose. So we'll find out tomorrow, I said. Chen shook his head. We'll have a team outside the building. If anything goes wrong, if you feel threatened at all, use the panic signal. Press the button on the wire device twice rapidly. We'll be inside in under 30 seconds. I agreed, but I knew Catherine would not threaten me physically. She was too smart for that, too careful. The next morning, I took a cab to Catherine's building. The doorman recognized me and waved me through without calling up. I rode the elevator to the 12th floor, with my heart pounding and the FBI wire recording every breath. Catherine opened the door before I knocked. She was dressed impeccably as always. Cream silk blouse, dark trousers. Her silver hair perfect. She looked like she had not lost a single night of sleep. "Sarah," she said, "come in." Her apartment looked exactly as it had the last time I visited. Books and art and elegant furniture. But now I looked at the paintings on her walls with different eyes. Which ones were real? Which ones were forgeries? Which ones held secrets she had killed careers to protect? Catherine poured coffee without asking if I wanted any. "You look terrible, darling. Not sleeping well? You look well rested." I said, for someone facing federal charges. She smiled. I have excellent lawyers, and the FBI's case is weak. They have some emails and some questionable provenance on a few paintings. That's circumstantial at best. She handed me a cup. But you didn't come here to discuss my legal situation. You came to tell me about this documentation you claim to have. I set down the coffee without drinking it. The Caravaggio from the 2022 exhibition, The Martyrdom of St. Matthew Study. It was loaned by a private collector in Geneva, Anton Dubois. I watched her face carefully. Except Anton Dubois doesn't exist, and the painting that was returned to Geneva wasn't the same one you borrowed. Catherine was very still. That's an extraordinary accusation. Based on what evidence? Based on the fact that the real Caravaggio is still in this apartment, I said. The words came out before I had fully thought them through, but as I said them, I knew they were true. Catherine would not have trusted anyone else with something that valuable. She would have kept it close. You can't prove that, Catherine said, but her eyes had flickered toward the door to her study, just for a moment, just long enough. I can, I said. I can get a warrant for another search. The FBI will bring in specialists who will examine every painting in this apartment with equipment that can see through varnish and overpainting. If there's a lost Caravaggio hidden here, they'll find it. Catherine stood very still. And if there isn't, if you're wrong and you send federal agents to ransack my home again, based on nothing but your desperate theories, then I'll have nothing, I said. But Catherine, we both know I'm not wrong. You told me yourself that you perfected the operation, that you brought in artists who could create paintings that would pass any examination. The perfect crime isn't just selling forgeries. It's stealing the real masterpieces and replacing them with copies so good that no one knows they're gone. Her expression changed. For the first time since I had known her, Catherine looked uncertain. She walked to the window and stood there looking out at Park Avenue. You were always so clever, Sarah. That's why I mentored you. I saw myself in you. Someone who understood that art history isn't about dusty archives and academic papers. It's about power, about controlling what the world believes is real and valuable. She turned to face me. The Caravaggio you're talking about is worth $30 million. Maybe more. It's been missing since World War II. Everyone assumed it was destroyed. But you found it, I said. My mouth was dry. Or someone in your network found it. And you've been sitting on it for 3 years. Catherine smiled. I didn't find it. I created it. That's what you don't understand. The painting everyone thinks was lost? It was never lost. It's been in a private collection in Switzerland for 70 years. The family that owned it didn't know what they had. They thought it was a copy. She walked toward me. I authenticated it. I confirmed it was real. And then I offered them a choice. Sell it publicly at auction and deal with questions about how their grandfather acquired it during the war. Or let me handle it quietly. They chose the quiet option. I arranged for a copy to be made. An extraordinary copy. And I switched them during the exhibition. The family got a copy, I said slowly. And you kept the original. Catherine nodded. They were happy with the arrangement. They got a painting they could display without scrutiny. I got a masterpiece that the world thinks is still lost. Everyone won. She walked to her desk and opened a drawer. Except you had to ask questions. You had to be so meticulous about provenance and documentation. You started noticing patterns. So you destroyed my career, I said. The wire was recording everything, every word, every confession. I protected the operation, Catherine corrected. You were becoming a liability. I did what was necessary. She pulled out a file and laid it on the desk between us. This is what the FBI didn't find during their search. Documentation for every painting I've moved through the network over 20 years. Names, dates, prices, museums that purchased our work. I stared at the file. Why are you showing me this? Catherine smiled. Because I want you to understand the scope of what you're trying to destroy. 12 major museums, 43 paintings, over $200 million in acquisitions. If you expose this, you don't just ruin me. You ruin institutions. You destroy public trust in every museum that relied on our authentications. That's not my problem, I said. Those institutions should have been more careful. Catherine laughed. Careful? Sarah, they were careful. They used the best experts, the best technology. Our forgeries were perfect because I made them perfect. I studied conservation science. I understood technical analysis. I knew exactly what tests museums would run, and I made sure our paintings would pass. She opened the file and showed me pages of documentation, invoices, shipping records, authentication reports with my signature, and the signatures of dozens of other experts. Do you see? She said. This isn't just my operation. Every curator who authenticated these paintings, every conservator who examined them, every museum director who approved acquisitions, they're all complicit. They all failed. They failed because you lied to them, I said. You created false provenance. You manipulated technical tests. You exploited their trust. Catherine shrugged. I gave them what they wanted. Masterpieces for their collections, exhibitions that drew crowds, reputations built on important discoveries. The fact that some of those masterpieces were created in a workshop in Florence instead of 500 years ago is irrelevant. I felt sick. She truly believed what she was saying. She had convinced herself that her fraud was a victimless crime, that replacing real art with perfect copies harmed no one. Where is it? I asked. The Caravaggio. Where do you keep it? Catherine's eyes narrowed slightly. Why do you want to know? Because I want to see it, I said. I want to see the painting that's worth $30 million. The painting you stole and replaced with a forgery. I want to understand what was worth destroying my life for. Catherine studied me for a long moment. Then she walked to the bookshelf that lined one wall of her study. She pressed something, and a section of shelving swung open. Behind it was a climate-controlled vault. I had this installed 5 years ago, she said. Temperature and humidity controlled. UV filtered lighting. Better conditions than most museums provide. She entered a code on a keypad, and the vault door opened. Inside was a single painting. Even from across the room, I could see it was extraordinary. The brushwork, the dramatic use of light and shadow. Pure Caravaggio. I walked closer. Martyrdom of St. Matthew. The study for the altarpiece in San Luigi dei Francesi. Catherine nodded. He painted this in 1599. It was sold to a private collector in the 17th century and passed through various families until it disappeared during World War II. The Swiss family that had it thought it was worthless. A damaged copy of the famous work. But you knew better, I said. I was standing directly in front of the painting now. The wire was capturing everything. Catherine's confession, the location of the stolen artwork, the proof that would bury her. I always know better, Catherine said. That's why I've been successful for so long. I understand art in a way most people never will. I see value where others see nothing. She stood next to me, both of us looking at the Caravaggio. I could have sold this painting for $30 million, but I kept it. Do you know why? I shook my head. Because some things are worth more than money. This painting has been missing for 80 years. Scholars have debated whether it still existed. And I'm the only person who knows the truth. That's power, Sarah. Real power. It's also theft, I said. You stole it from the Swiss family. They trusted you to authenticate it, and you betrayed them. Catherine turned to look at me. I gave them perfect copy. They're no worse off than they were before. Better, actually. Now they have a painting they can show without questions about wartime provenance. And I have the real masterpiece. Everyone benefits. I reached up slowly and pressed the panic button on the wire device twice. Rapid clicks that would alert Agent Chen. Accept the art world, I said. Accept everyone who trusted you. Accept the scholars who spent decades trying to find this painting. You took something that belonged to history and hid it for your own ego. Catherine's expression hardened. You're recording this conversation, aren't you? I did not answer. Catherine stepped back from me. You're wearing a wire. That's why you wanted to see the Caravaggio. That's why you asked so many questions. Her voice was rising now, anger replacing the calm confidence. You brought the FBI to my home? I heard sounds in the hallway outside, footsteps, voices. Agent Chen calling out that they had a warrant. Catherine looked at the door, and then at me. You stupid girl, she said. Do you think this ends with my arrest? Do you think the network stops because you caught me? The door burst open. Agent Chen and 4 other agents flooded into the apartment with weapons drawn. FBI, Dr. Marsh, step away from Dr. Hayes. Keep your hands where we can see them. Catherine raised her hand slowly. She was looking at me with an expression I had never seen before. Pure hatred. You've destroyed everything, she said. 40 years of work, relationships with collectors around the world, the most sophisticated operation in art history, gone because you couldn't accept that sometimes the copy is as valuable as the original? Agent Chen moved between us. Dr. Marsh, you're under arrest for theft of cultural property, fraud, and conspiracy. He began reading her rights. Other agents moved through the apartment, photographing everything, documenting the contents of the vault. I stepped out into the hallway and leaned against the wall. My hands were shaking now that it was over. A USA Park appeared next to me. You did well, Dr. Hayes. We have everything we need. Her confession, the stolen Caravaggio, the documentation she showed you. This case is airtight. I nodded, but could not speak. I watched as agents led Catherine out of her apartment in handcuffs. She kept her head high, her expression composed. Even in defeat, she maintained her dignity. The news broke within hours. Dr. Catherine Marsh, legendary curator and art historian, arrested for operating an international forgery ring. The Whitmore Museum released a statement promising full cooperation with federal investigators. Other museums began their own internal reviews. The art world went into crisis mode. Every acquisition Catherine had touched was now suspect. Marcus Whitmore called me that evening. Dr. Hayes, I owe you an apology. Multiple apologies. You were right about everything. His voice was strained. The board has voted to reinstate you. Full back pay. Restoration of your title and reputation. We want you to lead the internal investigation into which paintings in our collection are authentic. I should have felt triumphant. I should have felt vindicated. Instead, I felt exhausted. I need time to think about it, I said. I need to decide if I even want to work in this field anymore. Marcus was quiet for a moment. I understand. Take all the time you need. But Sarah, what you did took extraordinary courage. You exposed a fraud that could have continued for decades. The art world owes you a debt. I spent the next week giving depositions to federal prosecutors. They wanted every detail of my investigation, every conversation with Catherine, every piece of evidence I had uncovered. The case was expanding rapidly. Catherine's documentation had named other participants: dealers in Europe, collectors in Asia, museum directors who had knowingly purchased forgeries to boost their collections. Agent Chen told me they had identified at least 60 paintings that were suspected forgeries. Some were still in museum collections. Others had been sold to private collectors for millions of dollars. This is going to take years to sort out, he said. But Dr. Hayes, you started something important. You proved that even the most sophisticated fraud can be exposed if someone is willing to ask the right questions. Professor Chen at Yale called to congratulate me. I knew you were brilliant, Sarah. But this goes beyond brilliance. You took on the most powerful curator in the country, and you won. She paused. Have you thought about what comes next? Because every museum in America is going to want your expertise now. You're the person who caught Catherine Marsh. I had thought about it. I had thought about returning to the Whitmore and rebuilding my career, about writing the definitive book on art fraud and authentication, about becoming the expert everyone turned to when they needed to verify a masterpiece. But none of it felt right. Catherine had said I was too concerned with integrity. Maybe she was right. Maybe I cared too much about the truth. Trevor called and asked if I would meet him for coffee. We sat in a cafe near the museum, and he told me what had been happening inside the institution. It's chaos, he said. Half the staff is being investigated. The board is talking about closing the Renaissance wing until every painting can be re-examined. Marcus looks like he aged 10 years overnight. What about you? I asked. Are you okay? He nodded. I am now, but Sarah, I was terrified when I sent you those photographs. I thought I was going to lose my job. I thought Catherine would find out and destroy me like she destroyed you. He looked at his coffee cup. You were so calm about everything, like you knew exactly what you were doing. I didn't, I said. I was making it up as I went along. I just kept following the evidence wherever it led. Trevor smiled. That's what made it work. You didn't have a plan. You just refused to stop asking questions. He reached into his bag and pulled out an envelope. This came to the museum for you, from Switzerland. I opened it. Inside was a letter from the family that had owned the real Caravaggio. They had seen the news about Catherine's arrest. They wanted to thank me for recovering their painting. They wanted to know if I would be willing to authenticate other works in their collection. They were offering me a consulting position with a salary that made my eyes widen. You should take it, Trevor said. You should go to Switzerland and start over. Get away from all of this. I thought about it. A fresh start in Europe. working with private collectors who value discretion and expertise. No institutional politics, no boards to answer to, just me and the art and the truth. It was tempting, more than tempting. But there was something I needed to do first. I called Marcus and told him I would accept the reinstatement. Not permanently, but for 6 months. Long enough to examine every painting Catherine had acquired for the Whitmore. Long enough to separate the real masterpieces from the forgeries. Long enough to help the museum rebuild trust with the public. I returned to the Whitmore on a cold Monday morning in January. Security recognized me and nodded as I passed through. No escort this time. No visitor badge. Just my old credentials, reactivated, and my name restored to the staff directory. I took the elevator to the 5th floor where my old office waited. Someone had cleaned it. The boxes were gone. My books were back on the shelves. Even the photograph of me and Catherine at the Caravaggio exhibition had been returned to my desk. I looked at that photograph for a long moment. Catherine's smile, my proud expression. We had been mentor and protege then. I had trusted her completely. I picked up the frame and dropped it in the trash. Some memories did not deserve to be preserved. Marcus appeared in my doorway. "Welcome back, Dr. Hayes. The conservation lab is ready whenever you are." The work began immediately. I assembled a team of specialists. Dr. Morrison from NYU, Professor Chen from Yale. Independent conservators with no connection to Catherine or the Whitmore. We started with the 4 paintings I had first suspected. The fake Bellini that had destroyed my reputation, the Caravaggio study, the Titian portrait, the Bronzino. Morrison's technical analysis confirmed what we already knew. All forgeries, all sophisticated enough to fool experts, all placed in the collection through Catherine's network. Then we moved to the paintings with questionable provenance, the ones from phantom collectors. We examined 12 works over the first month. 7 were authentic. 5 were forgeries. The authentic paintings had been stolen from private collections and replaced with copies. The forgeries had been created specifically to fill gaps in the museum's collection. Catherine had been running both operations simultaneously, theft and fabrication, whatever the market demanded. I wrote detailed reports on each examination, technical analysis, provenance research, recommendations for how the museum should proceed. Marcus read every report and looked older each time. "We're going to have to make a public announcement," he said after the first month. "We can't keep this quiet. The donors need to know. The press needs to know. We have to be transparent." The press conference was brutal. Marcus stood at the podium and admitted that the Whitmore had been infiltrated by a sophisticated forgery operation, that at least 12 paintings in the permanent collection were not authentic, that the museum was conducting a comprehensive review of all acquisitions from the past 20 years. Reporters shouted questions. Donors demanded answers. The art world watched with a mixture of horror and schadenfreude. But something unexpected happened. Other museums began reaching out. They wanted my team to examine their collections. They wanted to know if Catherine's network had touched their institutions too. Within 6 weeks, I had offers from the Met, the National Gallery, the Getty, the Art Institute of Chicago. Everyone wanted the curator who had caught Catherine Marsh to verify their masterpieces. I worked 16-hour days. The conservation lab became my second home. I learned to see paintings the way Catherine had seen them, not as sacred objects, but as puzzles that could be solved with the right knowledge. I understood now why she had been so successful. She had treated art history as a technical challenge. She had studied every authentication method and figured out how to defeat them. Catherine's trial began in March. I was called to testify on the second day. The courtroom was packed with reporters and art world figures. Catherine sat at the defense table in an elegant suit, her silver hair perfect, her expression serene. She looked at me as I walked to the witness stand. No hatred now, just a kind of weary acceptance. We both knew how this would end. I testified for 3 hours. I walked the jury through my investigation, the phantom collectors, the technical analysis, the stolen Caravaggio hidden in her apartment. Catherine's lawyers tried to discredit me. They pointed out that I had been fired from the Whitmore, that I had a motive to fabricate evidence against my former mentor. But the technical reports spoke for themselves. The forgeries were real. The theft was documented. The network was undeniable. On the fourth day of the trial, Catherine surprised everyone by pleading guilty. Her lawyer negotiated a deal with the prosecutors. She would provide complete documentation of the forgery network, names of every participant, details of every painting, locations of stolen works. In exchange, she would receive a reduced sentence, 20 years instead of life, eligible for parole in 15. I was in the courtroom when she made her statement. "I devoted my life to art," Catherine said, "to preserving beauty and bringing masterpieces to institutions where the public could see them. I believed that a perfect copy was as valuable as an original, that the experience of viewing great art mattered more than questions of authenticity. I was wrong. I see that now. I harmed the institutions I loved. I betrayed the trust of colleagues and donors. I destroyed the career of someone who deserved better." She looked directly at me when she said that last part. Our eyes met across the courtroom. I saw something there I had never seen before. Regret. Real regret. Not for being caught. Not for the consequences she faced, but for what she had done to me. For using my reputation as a weapon. For destroying everything I had built because I had asked inconvenient questions. The judge sentenced her that afternoon. 20 years in federal prison. Forfeiture of all assets. Restitution to the museums and collectors she had defrauded. Catherine stood calmly as the sentence was read. She did not flinch. She did not cry. She maintained her dignity to the end. As they led her away, she paused and looked back at me one final time. She nodded slightly, an acknowledgement, a farewell. Then she was gone. I walked out of the courthouse into spring sunshine. Trevor was waiting on the steps. "How do you feel?" he asked. I thought about it. How did I feel? Vindicated, yes. Satisfied that justice had been served, but also empty. Catherine had been my mentor for 15 years. She had shaped my understanding of art and scholarship. Learning that she was a fraud did not erase everything she had taught me. It complicated it, made it more painful. "I feel tired," I said. Trevor nodded. "You should take a break. You've been working nonstop for months." He was right. I had barely slept since returning to the Whitmore. I had been driven by a need to fix what Catherine had broken, to restore integrity to the institution she had corrupted. But the work would never be finished. There would always be more paintings to examine, more questions to answer, more damage to repair. That evening, I pulled out the letter from the Swiss family. Their offer was still open, a consulting position, a chance to work independently, to choose my own projects and clients, to build something new on my own terms. I called the number they had provided. A woman answered in accented English. Yes, the position was available. Yes, they would be delighted if I accepted. Could I start in June? I gave my notice to Marcus the next day. The 6 months Marcus had requested had shortened to 4. I had worked faster than anyone expected. I had done what I promised. I had examined the most questionable acquisitions. I had helped the museum develop new authentication protocols. I had testified against Catherine. Now it was time to move forward. Marcus understood. "You've given this institution more than it deserved," he said. "Go to Switzerland. Build the career you should have had." My last day at the Whitmore was quiet. No farewell party. No speeches. Just a final walk through the galleries where I had spent so many years. I stood in front of the Renaissance collection and looked at the paintings that remained after we had removed the forgeries. Fewer masterpieces now, but every work that hung on these walls was authentic, real, true. That mattered. That was worth the cost. Trevor met me in the lobby as I was leaving. "I'm going to miss working with you," he said. "You taught me that asking questions is more important than accepting answers." I smiled. "Catherine taught me that too. She just didn't realize she was teaching the wrong lesson." He handed me a small package. "Open it later, when you're in Switzerland." I took the train to JFK that evening. The Swiss consulting firm had arranged everything: first-class ticket, apartment in Geneva, work visa, a fresh start in a city where no one knew about the Whitmore scandal or Catherine Marsh or the curator who had exposed the biggest art fraud of the century. I could be just Sarah Hayes again, an expert in Renaissance painting, someone who understood beauty and authenticity and the difference between them. On the plane, I opened Trevor's package. Inside was a small photograph. Not the one from my office with Catherine. This was different. It showed me at a symposium 3 years ago. I was standing at a podium, gesturing toward a slide of a Caravaggio painting. My expression was animated, passionate. This was who I had been before. Everything fell apart. This was who I could be again. Geneva was beautiful. The apartment overlooked Lake Geneva with the Alps visible in the distance. The Swiss family's collection was extraordinary. Real masterpieces that had been in their family for generations. They wanted my expertise not to launder forgeries, but to properly document and preserve their heritage. Honest work, meaningful work, the kind of work I had always wanted to do. I spent my first month in Switzerland just examining paintings. No pressure to authenticate quickly, no board meetings or donor dinners or institutional politics. Just me and the art and the quiet satisfaction of understanding how something was made and why it mattered. I wrote detailed reports. I made recommendations for conservation. I helped the family understand what they owned and why it was valuable. One evening, I received an email from Professor Chen at Yale. Catherine had died in prison. She had died of a heart attack and had served only 8 months of her 20-year sentence. The news hit me harder than I expected. I sat in my Geneva apartment and thought about the woman who had been my mentor and my destroyer. She had been brilliant, visionary in her own twisted way. She had understood art better than almost anyone I had ever met. And she had used that understanding to build a criminal empire. I thought about what she had said in court, that a perfect copy was as valuable as an original. I understood what she meant now. A forgery could be technically flawless. It could reproduce every brushstroke and color choice. It could pass every scientific test, but it would always be missing something essential: the moment of creation, the artist's hand, the historical truth of its making. Those things could not be copied. They could only be real or absent. The Swiss family asked me to authenticate a painting they had recently inherited from a distant relative. A small oil study attributed to Caravaggio, my first major project. I spent 2 weeks examining it. I studied the brushwork under magnification. I analyzed the pigments and medium. I researched the provenance. And slowly, carefully, I reached a conclusion. It was authentic, a real Caravaggio, probably from his time in Naples, worth millions. But more than that, it was real. I wrote the authentication report with steady hands. This was my expertise. This was what I had trained my entire career to do. Not to legitimize forgeries or launder stolen art, but to recognize truth when I saw it, to distinguish the real from the false, to preserve beauty and meaning for future generations. Catherine had tried to teach me that authenticity did not matter, but she was wrong. It was the only thing that mattered. On a warm day in August, I took the train to Zurich to meet with the family's lawyer. We were discussing long-term plans for the collection. As I walked through the old city, I passed a gallery window and saw a familiar painting, a Bellini Virgin and Child. Not the forgery from the Whitmore, not even a copy. Just another Renaissance painting of a common subject. I stopped and looked at it for a long moment. The memory was there. The scandal, the termination, the investigation, the trial. But the sting was gone. I had survived Catherine's attempt to destroy me. I had rebuilt my career on my own terms. I had learned to trust my instincts and ask questions even when the answers were dangerous. I had become someone stronger than the curator who had been fired from the Whitmore 18 months ago. Someone who understood that integrity was not weakness. It was survival. I turned away from the gallery window and continued walking. The sun was warm on my face. The city was beautiful. I had meetings to attend and paintings to authenticate and a life to build. Catherine was gone. The forgery network was destroyed. The truth had won, not because I was particularly clever or brave, but because I had refused to stop asking questions. That was enough. That would always be enough.